I woke up drifting in the middle of the lake with no boat keys, no cell service, and a note pinned under a rock that read, "You chose this. My family did not forget us out there." They sentenced us, but the truly terrifying part was not the water. It was realizing that when we finally staggered onto a private dock 7 hours later, they had not called rescue, they had called an estate attorney. My name is Isla Rivera, and at 34 years old, I was currently being cooked alive on a drifting piece of aluminum in the middle of Lake Travis. The Texas sun does not bargain, and by the time consciousness fully returned to me, the heat felt less like weather and more like a physical weight pressing me against the metal floor of the boat. My mouth tasted like copper and dust. Beside me, Evan Hale, my fiancé of 6 months, was still slumped over the cooler, his breathing shallow and ragged. He is 36, fit, and usually capable, but the sun had drained the color right out of him, leaving his skin a terrifying shade of pale gray. I sat up, the movement sending a sharp throb through my temples. The silence was absolute. No engine hum, no splashing waves, just the oppressive, ringing silence of deep water on a windless afternoon. I looked at the shoreline. It was a smudge of green and brown, distorting in the heat haze. Miles away, we were in the dead center of the widest channel, drifting aimlessly. Panic is a reflex, but my job as a compliance analyst is to suppress reflexes and look for data. I needed inventory. I crawled toward the center console, ignoring the burning sensation on my palms as they touched the hot metal. Water, that was the priority. I opened the cooler. It was mostly melted ice water, murky and warm. Floating in it were 2 plastic bottles, half empty. Yesterday, this cooler had been stocked for a family outing. Now, it was a tomb for empty promises. I checked the storage compartment under the seat. The first aid kit was there, but it felt light. I unzipped it. The antiseptic, the bandages, the flares, gone. All that remained were a few adhesive strips and a single packet of aspirin. My stomach twisted. I looked for the handheld radio my father, Gordon, always insisted we keep on the boat. The clip where it usually hung was empty. I checked the floor, the crevices, under the seats, nothing. "Evan," I croaked. My voice sounded like grinding stones. "Evan, wake up." He stirred, groaning, his hand shielding his eyes. "Isla, what time is it? Why did the engine stop?" "The engine didn't stop. Evan," I said, moving to the stern. It was stopped. I looked at the ignition. The key was gone. Not broken off, not dangling on the floor. Just gone. I knelt by the motor and popped the casing to check the battery. I am not a mechanic, but I know what an engine looks like. The negative cable hadn't rattled loose, the nut was unscrewed and placed neatly on the plastic tray, and the cable was tucked back where it wouldn't accidentally make contact. This was clean. This was deliberate. "The key fell out?" Evan asked, stumbling up behind me, bracing himself on the gunnel. He looked at the water, his eyes widening as the reality of our distance from land hit him. "We have to swim, Isla. We have to swim. I can see the marina from here. If we start now—" "No," I snapped, grabbing his wrist. His skin was clammy. "Look at the water. Evan, it is calm now. But that is 3 miles. Maybe 4. You are dehydrated. You will cramp up before you make the first mile. We stay on the boat. We can't just sit here. We're baking." He was spiraling. I could see the terror taking over. The fight-or-flight response that kills people in open water. "Sit down," I ordered, my voice dropping to that flat, corporate tone I used when delivering bad audit results. "Sit down, Evan. We are not swimming. We are securing the perimeter." I scanned the floor of the boat again, looking for the paddle. Every boat has an emergency paddle. It was gone. The throw cushion? Gone. The life jackets stowed under the console were the cheap, thin orange horse collar types, barely legal. Not the high-end vests we had worn onto the dock. Then I saw it, near the throttle, placed specifically where the driver would see it, was a smooth, gray river stone. It didn't belong on a pristine rental boat. It was out of place. I reached out and lifted it. Underneath was a piece of folded printer paper, protected from the wind by the rock's weight. I unfolded it. The text was not handwritten. It was printed in standard 12-point font. Impersonal and cruel. You chose this. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning I was craving. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hazing ritual. This was a sentence. "What is that?" Evan asked, squinting at the paper. "Evidence," I said. I didn't crumble. I didn't scream. I felt a cold, hard rage settle in the pit of my stomach. I took a Ziploc bag from the cooler, one that had held grapes just hours ago, shook it out, and sealed the paper inside. I put it in the zippered pocket of my shorts. "They did this," Evan whispered, the realization hitting him harder than the heat. "Your sister, your dad. They took the keys?" "They took the keys, the radio, the paddles, and the good life jackets." I listed, my eyes scanning the horizon. I saw white specks in the distance. Other boats. They were enjoying their Sunday, dragging tubes, drinking beer, oblivious to the two people slowly dying of exposure a few miles away. They stripped the boat of communications and mobility. "This is a script. Evan, we are playing our part in a tragedy." "We're going to die out here," he said, his voice cracking. "No," I said. "That is what they want. They want us to panic. They want us to try to swim and drown, or get heat stroke and make bad decisions. We are not doing that." I went into crisis management mode. "Take off your shirt," I told him. "We need shade." We rigged our light jackets and his shirt over the center console using the Bimini Top's frame, creating a small, sad patch of shadow. It wasn't much, but it lowered the temperature by a few degrees. "Here is the rule," I said, handing him one of the water bottles. "One capful every 30 minutes. Do not gulp it. Swish it in your mouth, then swallow. We have to make this last until sunset." "Sunset?" Evan looked at me, horrified. "Isla, it is barely noon. Then we have a long shift," I said. I pulled out my phone. Dead, of course, but I had a notebook in my bag. I took a pen and wrote down the time. 12:15 p.m. I looked at the shoreline, triangulating our position based on a water tower and a large cliffside mansion. Drifting south-southeast. Wind negligible. "Why?" Evan asked, huddling into the small shade. "Why would they do this? Over a signature?" "Because to them, I am not a person," I said, staring at the distant water tower. "I am an obstacle, and you remove obstacles." We sat in that boat for 7 hours. 7 hours of watching the sun move agonizingly slow across the Texas sky. 7 hours of listening to Evan's breathing get rougher. 7 hours of fighting the urge to drink the remaining water in one gulp. I documented everything. The wind shift at 2 o'clock, the boat that passed within a half mile at 4 o'clock but didn't see my waving shirt, the hallucinations that started around 5 o'clock, when the heat waves off the aluminum started to look like water spilling over the sides. I kept touching the plastic bag in my pocket. "You chose this." When the sun finally dipped low enough to cast long shadows, adrift of a private dock, I had ripped off the visor. I didn't cry when they pulled up. I didn't collapse into their arms. I asked for water, and I asked for the time. But the real horror wasn't the lake. It wasn't the thirst or the fear of dying. It was what we found out when we finally stepped onto the dock, our legs shaking, our skin burned raw. My family hadn't called the marina to say we were late. They hadn't called the police to say we were missing, 7 hours after abandoning us to die. My sister Paige had made exactly one phone call. She hadn't dialed 911. She had dialed the number of the family's estate planning attorney, to understand why my own flesh and blood would leave me to roast on a drifting rental boat in the middle of a Texas summer. You have to understand what I do for a living. I am a compliance analyst at Luminarch Financial Systems in Cedar Ridge, just outside of Austin. My entire career is built on the premise that people lie. They lie on expense reports. They lie on compliance disclosures. And they lie about conflicts of interest. I spend 40 hours a week looking for the one signature that does not match, the timestamp that is out of sequence, or the email chain that suddenly goes silent. I am paid to notice when the numbers do not add up. The problem was that I never thought to apply those auditing skills to my own family until it was too late. The catalyst for everything was 40 acres of dry, scrubby dirt in Red Hollow County. My grandmother left it to me specifically in her will, bypassing my father, Gordon, and my older sister, Paige. At the time, it felt less like an inheritance and more like a chore. The land was landlocked, covered in mesquite, and according to the last tax assessment, virtually worthless. I paid the nominal property taxes and forgot about it. Then, about 3 months ago, the dynamic shifted. Paige, who usually treated me with a distant, polite indifference, suddenly became my best friend. She started inviting me to lunch, texting me memes, and suggesting double dates with her husband and Evan. It felt nice. I wanted to believe that as we entered our 30s. We were finally bridging the gap that had always existed between us, but looking back, the conversations always circled back to the same topic. She would bring up the burden of property ownership. She talked about liability insurance and the terrifying potential of squatters. Then came the solution, presented as a casual, helpful idea over Cobb salads. She pitched the concept of a family-limited liability company. She said it was about tax optimization. She said it was about protecting the family legacy. She said that if I transferred the Red Hollow deed into the LLC, the family could pool resources to manage it, and I would not have to worry about the administrative headaches. It sounded logical. Paige is a realtor. She speaks the language of equity and asset protection fluently. My parents, Gordon and Elaine, began a campaign of soft pressure that was so subtle I almost missed it. They invited Evan and me over for Sunday dinners more often. In between passing the roast chicken and discussing football, my father would drop comments about how tired I looked. He would say that my job at Luminark was wearing me down. He would suggest that I was not thinking clearly because of the stress. My mother would chime in, patting my hand, saying that they just wanted to make my life easier. They framed the land transfer not as them taking something from me, but as them taking a weight off my shoulders. They kept saying that Evan was great, but he was not family, and he did not understand the complexities of generational wealth. I might have signed the papers if not for a single notification that popped up on my phone on a Tuesday afternoon. It was an automated email from a Land Scout service I had subscribed to years ago and forgotten. It was an unsolicited offer for the Red Hollow parcel. The offer was not for the agricultural value of dirt. The offer was for $350,000. I sat at my desk at Luminark, staring at the screen. Why would anyone pay over $250,000 for a patch of dust in the middle of nowhere? I dug deeper. I pulled up county records and saw the permits. There was a massive solar farm project breaking ground in 6 months. My worthless land was right in the middle of the proposed transmission corridor. Without my 40 acres, their grid connection would cost them millions in rerouting fees. My family knew, Paige knew. That was the first fracture in the illusion. The second fracture happened 2 days before the lake trip. I was at Paige's house for a barbecue. She had asked me to bring over a specific bottle of wine. When I walked into the kitchen, she was out in the backyard by the grill. Her laptop was open on the kitchen island, and a stack of papers sat next to it. I am a compliance analyst. My eyes are trained to read upside down. The document on top was not a deed transfer. It was a draft petition for a conservatorship. My heart hammered against my ribs as I leaned in. The petitioner was my father, Gordon Rivera. The proposed conservatee was me, Isla Rivera. The justification listed was a sickening work of fiction. It claimed I had a history of erratic financial decisions and episodes of paranoia. It cited my refusal to consolidate family assets as proof of my inability to act in my own best interest. They were not just trying to trick me out of the land. They were building a legal framework to take it by force, declaring me incompetent to manage my own affairs. I took a photo of the document with my phone, my hands shaking, and then backed away before Paige walked in. Later that evening, the trap snapped shut. Paige cornered me in the living room, holding a folder with a pen clipped to it. She was smiling, but her eyes were hard. She said we should get the paperwork out of the way before the weekend trip to Lake Travis. She said it would be better to go to the lake with a clear mind, knowing everything was settled. She framed it as a favor to me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation underneath the veneer of sisterly concern. They had a deadline. The solar farm developers likely needed the land secured by the end of the month. I told her no. I did not scream. I did not reveal that I knew about the solar farm or the conservatorship draft. I just said that I wanted to get an independent appraisal before I signed anything. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My father stopped laughing at something Evan said. My mother set her wine glass down a little too hard. Paige's smile faltered. She asked why I was being so difficult. She asked if I didn't trust my own family. I told her that trust had nothing to do with it. It was about due diligence. On the drive home, Evan was quiet. I showed him the photo of the conservatorship draft. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He read the legal jargon, the lies about my mental state, the clinical way they described stripping me of my autonomy. He looked at me and said the truest thing anyone has ever said to me. He told me that they did not need my agreement anymore. He said that if I refused to sign, their only option was to make the lies in that document come true. They did not need my signature. They needed my credibility destroyed. They needed me to look unstable. They needed me to look like someone who makes dangerous, irrational choices, like someone who would recklessly take a boat out into the middle of a lake without safety gear. We still agreed to go on the trip. It sounds insane now, but at that moment, I thought I could outsmart them. I thought if I stayed vigilant, if I kept my guard up, I could gather more evidence of their scheme. I thought we were walking into a negotiation. I did not realize we were walking into an execution. The drive to the lake house took 2 hours, and for the entire duration, my phone buzzed with texts from the family group chat. They sent heart emojis, champagne bottle stickers, and excitement about the perfect weather. If I did not know better, I would have thought we were heading to a surprise birthday party rather than a tactical engagement. The premise of the weekend was sold to us as a triple-threat peace offering. It was supposed to be a reconciliation for the tension over the land, a relaxation break for my so-called burnout, and a chance for Paige, who dabbled in photography, to take some engagement photos for Evan and me. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, the house loomed like a clipping from a luxury lifestyle magazine. It was a sprawling white modern farmhouse with black trim and massive windows that reflected the shimmering lake below. It was beautiful, but it felt sterile. Inside, the air smelled aggressively of lemon polish and chemically fresh linen. There were no scuff marks on the floorboards, no personal photos on the mantel, and no sense that anyone had ever actually lived here. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set, dressed specifically for the performance we were about to act out. Paige met us at the door with a pitcher of iced tea and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She hugged me, holding on for a second too long, her fingers digging slightly into my shoulder blades. She gushed about the lighting for the photos and how happy she was that we could all just put the business stuff behind us for 48 hours. She said she wanted us to be a family again. Then I walked into the kitchen. The island was a vast expanse of white quartz, completely empty except for one object. Sitting right in the center, impossible to miss, was a thick manila folder. It was the same color as the one she had tried to force on me earlier in the week. I froze, staring at it. Paige followed my gaze and let out a light, airy laugh. She waved a hand dismissively and said that I should ignore that. She claimed she had just brought it along in case we felt like looking at it on Sunday night, but for now, we should pretend it did not exist. It was a power move. She was planting the flag. She was telling me that even while we drank tea and discussed wedding venues, the threat was still sitting there, waiting for me to capitulate. Dinner that night was a masterclass in passive aggression. My father, Gordon, manned the grill on the deck, flipping steaks with a performative gusto. We sat around the outdoor table as the sun went down, casting long, bruised shadows across the water. The conversation was light, but the subtext was heavy enough to sink the dock. Midway through the meal, Gordon wiped grease from his chin and launched into a story about a distant cousin of ours, a man named Arthur. I had heard the story before, but never with this specific inflection. He told us how Arthur had inherited a small business and refused to listen to the advice of his elders. He described how Arthur thought he was smarter than the family, how he tried to go it alone, and how he ended up bankrupt and estranged within 5 years. Gordon took a sip of his beer and looked directly at me. He said that the tragedy was not that Arthur lost the money. The tragedy was that Arthur did not trust the people who loved him enough to protect him from himself. He said that arrogance is the most expensive luxury a person can buy. The table went silent. Evan shifted in his chair, his fork scraping loudly against the china. My mother, Elaine, just smiled and passed the potato salad, as if her husband had not just delivered a thinly veiled threat to my financial future. Elaine was playing her own role. She was the peacemaker, the soft buffer between the hard edges of my father and sister. She kept refilling my glass, asking about my job, and fussing over my hair, but her affection felt calculated. Later in the evening, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. When I came back out, I stopped in the hallway. The living room lay in a direct line of sight from the shadowed corridor. My purse was sitting on the armchair where I had left it. My mother was standing over it. She did not look like a snooping villain. She looked like a concerned mother tidying up. But I watched as her hand slipped inside the main compartment. She did not take anything. She was not looking for cash. She was checking the pockets. She was feeling the weight of the lining. It was a security check. She was making sure I was not recording them. Or perhaps she was looking for the car keys. She withdrew her hand quickly when Paige entered the room, and her face snapped back into that placid, maternal mask. I backed into the bathroom and flushed the toilet to announce my presence before walking out. My heart was hammering against my ribs. When we finally retreated to our guest room, Evan pulled me into the corner away from the door. He looked rattled. He held up his hand, showing me his key ring. He whispered that something was wrong. When we arrived, he had hung the keys on the hook by the front door. Next to Gordon's, he was sure of it. But 10 minutes ago, he found them in the decorative bowl on the entryway table. It seemed like a small thing. Maybe someone just moved them to tidy up. But Evan shook his head. He said it felt like a test. It felt like someone was practicing. They were seeing if we would notice if the keys were moved. They were establishing a pattern of displacement, conditioned to make us question our own memory. If they could make us doubt where we put the keys tonight, they could make us doubt everything else tomorrow. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress too firm, the sheets too crisp. I realized then that we were not guests. We were subjects in a controlled experiment. I took out my phone. I knew better than to trust the Wi-Fi in this house, so I switched to data. I opened my location-sharing app and selected my best friend, Sarah, back in Austin. I set the sharing to always and sent her a text. I told her that if I did not text her by noon the next day, she should call the non-emergency line in this county. I deleted the text from the chat thread immediately after sending it. Then I took a business card I had been carrying in my wallet. It was for a shark of a litigator named Sierra Lang, a woman who specialized in contested wills and hostile trust takeovers. I slipped the card out of my wallet and pried off the back of my phone case. I slid the card between the phone and the opaque case, snapping it back into place. If they went through my purse again, they would find nothing but lip balm and receipts. I lay in bed next to Evan, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the stagnant air. The house was quiet, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of people holding their breath. Everything about the day had been flawless. The food was perfect. The weather was perfect. The smiles were perfect. That was what terrified me. Real families fight. Real families have awkward silences and messy kitchens. Real families forget to buy ice or burn the garlic bread. This family was operating with the smooth, synchronized efficiency of a heist crew. They had rehearsed this. They knew exactly where they wanted us to stand, what they wanted us to say, and where they wanted us to end up. And as I closed my eyes, I realized the script did not end with engagement photos on the dock. It ended with the file on the kitchen counter, signed, sealed, and delivered. One way or another, the morning air at the marina was thick with humidity and the smell of gasoline. My sister, Paige, was vibrating with an energy that felt less like excitement and more like adrenaline. She was acting like a camp counselor. Her voice pitched an octave higher than normal as she directed us toward the end of the dock. She handed me a life jacket, thrusting it into my chest with a bright smile. It was not one of the neoprene vests we had used the day before. It was a cheap, bulky orange collar, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $10 just to meet the legal minimum requirement. It felt flimsy in my hands. My father, Gordon, was standing by the larger boat, a sleek fiberglass runabout that belonged to the rental agency's premium fleet. He was adjusting his sunglasses, looking out at the water with a smirk. He made a loud show of checking his phone and then tossing it into his waterproof bag. He joked that the best part of the lake was the dead zones. He said that no cell service was the only way to have a real vacation. It sounded like a dad joke, but looking back, it was a disclaimer. He was establishing the narrative for why they would be unreachable later. We were not going on the big boat. Paige pointed to a smaller vessel tied to the far cleat. It was an older aluminum fishing skiff with a 20-horsepower outboard motor and a single bench seat. She said it would be romantic for Evan and me to have our own space. She said we could follow them out to the cove, take some photos, and have a private picnic. She handed me a canvas tote bag. She said she had packed us snacks so we would not get hungry. I thanked her. I actually thanked her. We cast off around 10 in the morning. The water was choppy, and the little aluminum boat slapped hard against every wake. Evan was driving, steering us away from the marina, following the white wake of my family's boat. They were moving fast, kicking up spray, widening the gap between us with every passing minute. We were about 2 miles out, nearing the center of the widest channel, when I saw Paige turn around in the lead boat. She waved. It looked like a friendly gesture, a follow-me signal, but then the pitch of their engine changed. They did not slow down to let us catch up. They throttled forward, the bow of their boat rising as they planed out and shot toward the distant bend in the river. I turned to tell Evan to speed up, but the silence hit me first. It was instantaneous. There was no sputtering, no coughing, no gradual loss of power that signals an empty fuel tank. The outboard motor simply died. 1 second it was roaring, the next, it was dead weight. The silence that followed was so abrupt, it made my ears ring. Evan tried the pull cord. Nothing. He tried again, ripping it back with frustration. The flywheel spun, but there was no spark. I told him to stop. I moved to the back of the boat, my compliance brain taking over. Mechanical failure is rarely this clean. I popped the cowling off the motor. The smell of hot grease wafted up. I traced the fuel line. It was connected. I checked the spark plugs. They were seated. Then I looked at the battery box. The black negative cable was not attached to the terminal. It was not dangling loose, as if it had vibrated off during the ride. The nut that secured it was missing entirely. The cable had been tucked neatly behind the battery casing, wedged in so it would not make accidental contact. Someone had loosened it by hand, leaving just enough contact to get us out of the marina. Knowing the vibration of the water would eventually shake the connection free, it was a timer made of physics. I looked up at Evan. He was staring at the horizon where my family's boat had vanished. He asked if we could fix it. I told him we could not fix sabotage without tools. I reached for the tote bag Paige had given us, looking for water. I pulled out the contents one by one. A large bag of pretzels, a package of beef jerky, a canister of salted mixed nuts. There were 2 small bottles of water, the 12-ounce kind. Warm and sweating. That was it. She had packed us a bag designed to accelerate dehydration. Evan went for the paddles. He reached under the gunnel where they were supposed to be clipped. His hand grasped empty air. He dropped to his knees and checked the floor. Nothing. He looked at the bowline, the rope used to tie the boat to the dock. It was gone. I crawled to the front of the boat to check the anchor locker. It was empty, but what caught my eye were the knots. The cleat where the anchor rope should have been tied was bare, but the rope had not been cut. The end of the knot was smooth. Someone had untied it. Evan called my name. His voice was trembling. He was pointing at the storage compartment under the bench seat. He ran his finger along the edge of the fiberglass lid. There were fresh scratches in the paint. Deep gouges where a screwdriver or a pry bar had been used to leverage the lid open and closed repeatedly. They had practiced. They had come down here, maybe early this morning or late last night, and they had rehearsed stripping this boat. They had timed how long it took to disconnect the battery. They had checked which supplies to remove. Then I saw the rock. It was sitting on the center console, right next to the useless throttle. It was a smooth, gray river stone, completely out of place on the clean metal. I picked it up. Underneath was the piece of paper, folded into a perfect square. I unfolded it. You chose this. The rage that hit me was cold and clarifying. It was not the hot, messy anger of a family argument. It was the sterile, calculating fury of a woman looking at a fraudulent audit. They wanted me to think this was consequence. They wanted me to believe that my refusal to sign their papers had naturally led to this misfortune. I looked at the sky. The forecast had called for a shift in the weather around noon. My father always checked the weather. He knew. A dark bank of clouds was forming in the north, pushing a fresh wind ahead of it. The wind was not blowing toward the marina. It was blowing toward the desolate, rocky cliffs on the south side of the lake, an area with no houses and no boat traffic. We were drifting. I grabbed the life jackets, the cheap, useless collars, and told Evan to give me his knife. He did not have one. They had taken his multi-tool from his bag earlier, claiming it would set off a metal detector at a museum we never visited. I used my teeth to tear the packaging tape off the tote bag. I stood up and jammed the boat hook, the only tool they had overlooked, into the rod holder. I tied the arms of our windbreakers and the life jacket straps together, stretching them across the hook and the windshield frame. It was a pathetic, makeshift sail, but it caught a cupful of wind. I told Evan to get his phone. He said he had 10% battery left. I told him to open the camera. I did not want him to call for help that would not come. I wanted a deposition. I narrated everything as I worked. I showed the disconnected battery cable. I showed the missing paddles. I showed the bag of salted food. I held up the note. My voice was steady, monotone, reciting facts for a jury that was not there yet. I ripped the lid off the cooler. It was plastic and flimsy, but it had a surface area. I leaned over the side of the boat, the metal burning my thighs, and began to paddle. It was exhausting. For every stroke I took, the wind seemed to push us back too. The clouds moved in, blocking the sun, but the heat did not break. It just became heavier, a suffocating blanket of pressure. The current caught us, dragging the boat sideways. I watched the shoreline of the marina get smaller and smaller. We were not just lost, we were being erased. My family had calculated the fuel, the battery life, the hydration levels, and the wind speed. They had done the math on our lives. They expected us to panic. They expected us to turn on each other. I dipped the cooler lid into the water again. I looked at Evan, who was pale and sweating, holding the phone with a shaking hand. I told him to keep recording. I told him that we were not going to die today, because I had to live long enough to fire my family. The sound of aluminum scraping against wood was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. It was not a graceful landing. We drifted into the pilings of a small, weather-beaten private dock attached to a cluster of rental cabins on the far west side of the lake. I threw the bow line, the one I had salvaged from the anchor well, around a cleat and pulled until the muscles in my back screamed. We fell onto the wooden planks, not in a romantic embrace, but like two sacks of wet cement. My legs were trembling so violently I could not stand. Evan was coughing, dry heaving nothing but bile and panic. A man came running down the hill from the maintenance shed. He was older, with skin like cured leather and a name tag that read, Duke Rayner. He looked at us, then at the boat, then back at us. He did not ask if we were okay. He asked if we had crashed. I forced myself to sit up. The ground was spinning, but my mind was snapping back into alignment. The survival phase was over. The audit phase had begun. "Do not touch the boat," I rasped. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Sir, please, do not touch the console. Do not touch the battery box. Call the Marine Patrol, now." Duke looked at me, confused. "Honey, you look like you need an ambulance, not a cop." "Both," I said. "But get the police first. This is a crime scene." By the time the Marine unit arrived, 45 minutes later, I had managed to drink half a bottle of water Duke provided and regain the ability to stand. Evan was sitting on a cooler, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the water. I was standing guard over the boat when the officers stepped onto the dock, followed by an investigator named Miles Cade. I did not act like a victim. Victims cry. Victims ask for their mothers. I acted like a compliance officer. "My name is Isla Rivera," I said, my voice flat and monotone. "I need you to photograph the ignition. Note the absence of the key. Photograph the storage lockers. Note the absence of the paddles, the throw cushion, and the radio. Photograph the battery casing." Cade was a sharp-eyed man who looked like he had seen too many drunk boating accidents. He looked at me skeptically. "Ma'am, maybe the key just fell overboard. It happens." "The battery cable," I said, pointing to the stern. "Check the negative terminal. It was not vibrated loose. The nut is missing. The cable was tucked. Someone did that by hand." Duke, the mechanic, stepped forward. He had already taken a look while we waited. "She is right. Officer, that cable didn't pop off. There is no corrosion. And the threading is clean. Someone unscrewed it and hid the nut. I would stake my license on it." Cade's expression shifted. He signaled his partner to start taking pictures. I pulled the Ziploc bag from my pocket. "Item number 1, I said, handing it to him. "Found under a rock placed on the console. The rock was not there when we rented the boat." Cade read the note through the plastic. "You chose this." He looked up at me, the skepticism gone, replaced by a dark curiosity. "Who are they?" "My family," I said, while the officers processed the boat. The marina manager drove over in a golf cart. He was pale, looking terrified of a lawsuit. I asked him the question that had been burning a hole in my stomach for 7 hours. "The other boat," I said. "The 22-foot runabout, rented by Gordon Rivera. When did they return it?" The manager checked his clipboard. "Mr. Rivera? He brought the boat back at 2:15 this afternoon. Said you two decided to stay out longer and would ride back with another group later. He seemed, cheerful, actually." 2:15. We had been drifting for barely 2 hours at that point. They had gone back to the dock, returned the boat, and walked away. "Did they ask about us?" Evan asked, his voice cracking. "Did they look worried?" "No," the manager said. "The daughter, Paige? She was laughing. I remember because she bought a bunch of those tourist keychains in the shop. Her and the older gentleman were joking about the heat." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. They had not just abandoned us, they had gone shopping. My phone, now charged enough to turn on, began to flood with notifications. There were 12 missed calls from my office, 3 from a neighbor, and a string of text messages from my mother. "Elaine," I opened the thread. The messages were masterpieces of plausible deniability. 3:30 p.m. "Honey, we are back at the house. The signal out there is terrible. Let us know when you guys get in." 5 p.m. "Starting to worry. Are you two still fishing? Call me." 6:15 p.m. "Gordon says you probably found a cove to camp in. Hope you have enough water. Text me when you get a signal." They were creating a digital paper trail. If we died, these texts would be read in court to show a concerned mother trying to reach her wayward daughter. They were covering their tracks before we were even dead. "I need a copy of your technical assessment," I told Duke, turning back to the mechanic. I need you to write down exactly what you saw regarding the battery. Use your letterhead. Sign it. Date it. Duke nodded, looking grim. I'll write it up. That wasn't an accident. Lady, that was a trap. Investigator Cade pulled me aside as the ambulance crew started to check Evan's vitals. Ms. Rivera, I have to ask, you are alleging that your family disabled your vessel and left you in a dead zone. Do you think they intended to kill you? I looked at him. I thought about the conservatorship papers. I thought about the solar farm contract. I thought about the $100,000 debt my father had mentioned Arthur losing. No, I said. Killing me is messy. Killing me triggers a homicide investigation. They did not want me dead. They wanted me broken. Broken? They wanted us to panic, I explained, the logic crystallizing in my mind. They wanted us to get dehydration delirium. They wanted us to scream at each other. They wanted the Marine Patrol to find us hysterical, dehydrated, and making no sense. Then they could use that police report to prove I am mentally unstable. They could say, look, she took a boat out without safety gear. She got lost. She hallucinated. It was not a murder plot. It was a character assassination. Cade stared at me for a long moment. That is elaborate. It is profitable, I corrected. Then my phone buzzed again. It was a voicemail notification, but it was not a new message. It was a recovered message from earlier in the afternoon. One that had failed to download until I hit the strong Wi-Fi at the Marina office. It was from Paige. She must have pocket-dialed me. Or maybe she thought she had hung up. I pressed play, holding the phone up so Cade could hear. There was the sound of wind and the hum of an engine, their boat engine. Then Paige's voice, clear and sharp. No. He said the emergency hearing can be scheduled for Tuesday morning. If they are not back by tonight, we file for an emergency temporary order. We cite missing person stress and reckless endangerment. I already have the doctor ready to sign the affidavit saying Isla has been acting manic for weeks. There was a pause, and then my father's voice, distant but audible. Make sure you mention the land. We need to freeze the assets before she does something stupid with it. I know. Dad, Paige replied. Just keep driving. Don't look back. They chose this. The recording ended. The silence on the dock was heavy. Cade looked at the phone, then at me. He did not look skeptical anymore. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of something much darker than a boating accident. I need that recording, Cade said. You can have a copy, I said, my thumb hovering over the forward button to send it to Sierra Lang, the attorney whose card was hidden in my phone case. But the original stays with me. I looked out at the dark water. The lake looked peaceful now, black and still. Somewhere across that water, in a beautiful white farmhouse, my family was probably opening a bottle of wine, rehearsing their concerned faces for the police. They thought they had won. They thought I was currently crying in a hospital bed, looking like a lunatic. They had no idea that I had not just survived the lake. I had brought the lake back with me, less than 24 hours after I washed the lake silt out of my hair. The doorbell rang. It was not a neighbor checking in, and it was certainly not an apology. It was a process server. He handed me a thick envelope, muttered a generic, "Have a nice day," and walked away, leaving me holding the weapon my family had been forging while I was drifting on the water. I opened the packet on my kitchen counter. It was a petition for an emergency temporary conservatorship. The petitioner was Gordon Rivera. The language was not emotional. It was terrifyingly clinical. It stated that Isla Rivera was exhibiting erratic behavior, severe paranoia, and a documented inability to manage her assets. It claimed I was at immediate risk of self-destruction, and that I had fallen under the undue influence of a romantic partner who sought to isolate me from my support system. That was their narrative for Evan. They were not just coming for my land, they were coming for my mind. Attached to the petition was a motion for an independent psychological evaluation. My sister Paige had already selected the doctor. The name listed was a psychiatrist who I knew played golf with my father. If I walked into that office, I would never walk out with a clean bill of health. They were not trying to diagnose me. They were trying to certify a lie. I did not have time to process the betrayal because my phone rang. It was the head of human resources at Luminarch Financial Systems. Isla, do you have a moment? Her voice was tight. I drove to the office, my stomach churning. When I sat down in the glass-walled conference room, I saw the pity in her eyes. She slid a printout across the table. It was an email from my father to the company's general ethics inbox, copied to the CEO. It was written in the tone of a heartbroken parent. It apologized for any recent disruptions I might have caused, cited a severe mental health crisis, and asked the company to be patient while the family intervened. They were poisoning the well. They knew I worked in compliance, in my field. Reputation is currency. If you are flagged as unstable, you are a liability. We think it is best if you take some administrative leave, the HR director said, just until this personal matter is resolved. I walked out of the building with my access badge deactivated, carrying a box of my personal effects. They had stripped me of my credibility before I even stepped into a courtroom. I did not go home. I went straight to the office of Sierra Lang. Sierra was a woman who looked like she chewed glass for breakfast. Her office was not decorated with diplomas, but with framed victories against predatory trustees. I laid the conservatorship petition on her desk, next to the crumpled note from the boat and the digital recording of Paige's voicemail. Sierra read the petition in silence. She did not gasp. She did not offer sympathy. She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and uncapped a pen. "They are using the Brittany playbook," Sierra said, her voice sharp and precise. "Isolate the target, pathologize reasonable anger, and use the court system to freeze the assets before the target can hire a defense. They want you to react. They want you to scream in court so they can point a finger and say, 'See? She is hysterical.' She looked at me. We are not going to scream. We are going to audit them." Sierra immediately filed 3 motions. The first was an emergency order for the preservation of electronic evidence. We needed to stop Paige from deleting her text messages and the call logs from the day of the lake incident. The second was a subpoena for the security footage from the marina, specifically the parking lot and the dock, covering the entire duration of the rental. We needed to prove their demeanor. Juries do not like grieving families who stop to buy souvenirs while their daughter is missing. The third motion was for a forensic analysis of the note. "I want the printer metadata," Sierra said. "I want to know exactly which device printed that note and at what time. If we can link that paper to Paige's home office printer, we prove premeditation. Then we address the psychological evaluation. We are filing an objection to their chosen doctor." Sierra dictated to her paralegal. "We will agree to an evaluation, but only by a court-appointed forensic psychologist with no ties to the family. And we are demanding that the entire session be video recorded. If they want to claim you are crazy, let them do it on camera." While Sierra worked on the filings, Evan was sitting in the corner with his laptop, digging through the digital debris of my family's entangled lives. Because of the proposed family LLC, Paige had shared a Google Drive folder with me weeks ago to show me the draft operating agreement. I had never looked at it closely. Evan had been scrolling through the version history of the documents. "Isla," he said, his voice low, "come look at this." He had found a subfolder labeled Research. Inside was not market research for real estate. It was a collection of saved articles and email drafts. One email, dated 3 months prior, was a thread between Paige and a lawyer I did not recognize. The subject line was purely hypothetical. The email read, "How does a family prove incapacity if the subject refuses to see a doctor? Can witness testimony from family members override the lack of a medical diagnosis?" My father had replied to the thread with a single line. "We just need to create a pattern of behavior. If she looks unstable, the judge will order the exam. And once we get the order, we control the doctor." I stared at the screen. It was not a smoking gun. It was a blueprint. They had been planning this since the moment I received the offer for the solar farm. The trip to the lake was not an attempt to kill me. It was a stage play designed to generate the erratic behavior they needed for the court filing. They left me there so that when I came back, I would be angry, disheveled, and raving about a conspiracy. They were banking on me sounding crazy. Sierra looked at the email and smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "This changes the venue," she said. "This is not just a conservatorship case anymore. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. They are not trying to protect you. They are trying to steal a solar farm." She picked up her phone and dialed the number for the district attorney's office. She did not ask for a favor. She asked for the fraud division. "We are going to pivot," Sierra said, looking at me. "We are not going to defend you against their claims. We are going to attack their motive. By the time we walk into that hearing, we will not be arguing about your mental health. We will be arguing about the price of 40 acres in Red Hollow." The game had shifted. I walked into that office as a victim trying to prove I was sane. I was leaving as a prosecutor building a case. My family thought they had trapped me in a net of lies. They did not realize that by filing that petition, they had just put their names on a sworn document that would become the evidence of their own crime. Evidence does not scream, it whispers, but it never lies. While my family was busy painting me as a hysterical woman in the court of public opinion, my lawyer, Sierra Lang, was dismantling their lives one receipt at a time. The first crack in their perfect facade came from a laboratory in downtown Austin. In the form of a forensic document analysis report, I sat in Sierra's conference room, staring at the magnified images on the screen. The technician had analyzed the note found on the boat, the one that read, "You chose this," to the naked eye. It was just text on paper, but under the microscope, it was a fingerprint. The analysis identified the specific toner composition and the microscopic tracking dots that many color laser printers leave on every page to prevent counterfeiting. It matched the Canon printer sitting in Paige's home office. We had obtained a comparison sample from a recipe she had printed for me 2 Christmases ago, which I had kept in a binder. The margins were identical. The toner density was a match. My sister had typed out my psychological sentence while sitting in her air-conditioned study, probably sipping the same iced tea she had served me upon arrival. Then came the boat. Investigator Miles Cade walked in with a file that smelled like the marina office. He had subpoenaed the rental records. My family had claimed that the rental agency assigned us the small, decrepit skiff by chance, but the logs told a different story. The rental agreement was under Paige's name. That in itself was not illegal, but the notes section was damning. There was a specific request logged in the system. Customer requests older model skiff for vintage photo shoot aesthetic. Requested removal of GPS tracker for authenticity of shots. They had not just given us the bad boat. They had specifically requested the only vessel in the fleet that could not be tracked remotely. Sierra did not stop there. She is a shark who smells blood in financial statements, and she had pulled Paige's credit card history for the week leading up to the trip. It was a mundane list of grocery runs and gas station fill-ups, until we got to the Thursday before the weekend. There was a transaction at a hardware store in Cedar Ridge for $42.16. Sierra pulled the itemized receipt, 1-socket wrench set, specifically sized for marine battery terminals, 1 roll of heavy-duty waterproof electrical tape, and 1 item from the garden center, a decorative, smooth gray riverstone, usually sold in bags for landscaping, but sold individually as a Zen paperweight. The room went silent. The stone on the console was not a random rock picked up from the shore, it was a prop. Paige had bought the rock, printed the note, and bought the tool to disconnect the battery in a single shopping trip. It was premeditated malice with a receipt attached, but the visuals were what turned my stomach. Duke, the mechanic who saved us, had come through with the security footage from the marina's private dock. The file played on the large monitor. I watched the timestamp, 2:14 p.m. The footage showed my family's sleek runabout gliding into the slip. My father, Gordon, stepped off first. He did not look like a man whose daughter was missing in a dead zone. He looked annoyed. He checked his watch, a gold Rolex I knew well. He said something to Paige, who was laughing as she tied off the line. They did not scan the horizon. They did not ask the dockhand if the other boat had returned. They simply unloaded their coolers, walked to the parking lot, and drove away. Their body language was not that of a grieving family. It was that of a team that had finished a job and was clocking out. Then came the twist that shifted the ground beneath us. Evan had been quiet all morning. Scrolling through his phone, his face pale, he suddenly slammed his hand down on the table, making us all jump. "I am an idiot," he whispered. He held up his phone. On the screen was the Find My app. "I put an AirTag on the spare key," he said, his voice shaking. 2 years ago, we were at the beach, and I lost the keys in the sand. Remember? I bought a 4-pack of tags. I put one on my key ring, one on yours, and one on the plastic fob of the spare key." I stared at him. The spare key was the one that had vanished from the boat's ignition. "I never checked it because I thought the key was at the bottom of the lake," Evan said. "I assumed they threw it overboard. But look," he tapped the screen. The last known location was not in the water. It was not at the marina. The signal had pinged 4 hours ago. The location was a residential address in a gated community in West Austin. It was Paige's house. She had not thrown the key away. She had kept it, maybe out of habit, maybe as a trophy, or maybe she just forgot it was in her pocket when she walked off the boat. But the digital footprint was undeniable. My sister was in possession of the stolen property that had left us stranded. That night, the cracks in the family wall turned into a landslide. My phone rang at 2 a.m. I was staying in a hotel under a fake name, but I had kept my number active for this exact reason. I answered in the dark. "Isla?" The voice was trembling. It was my mother, Elaine. I did not say a word. I just hit the record button on the app Sierra had installed. "I did not know about the wire," Elaine whispered, her voice thick with tears and wine. "I swear to God, Isla, Paige said they were just going to take the keys. She said you would drift for an hour, get scared, and then call us. We were supposed to rescue you. It was supposed to be a lesson. I did not know they disconnected the battery. I did not know there was no radio. She was not confessing to save me. She was confessing to save herself. She had realized the legal tide was turning, and she was trying to cut a deal with her conscience. You left us there. Mom," I said into the dark. "You ate dinner while we were drinking rationed water. I thought you were stubborn," she cried. "I thought you were just refusing to call because of pride. I did not know you could not call. It was not enough for forgiveness, but it was enough for an indictment." The next morning, Sierra took everything: the printer analysis, the receipts, the video, the AirTag data, and the recording of my mother, to the district attorney's office. We met with a prosecutor named Jordan Pike. He was a young, ambitious man who looked at the file not as a family dispute, but as a felony flowchart. He listened to the recording. He looked at the receipt for the battery wrench. "This is not a civil matter anymore," Pike said, closing the folder. "This is reckless endangerment, unlawful restraint, and tampering with a vessel, if they crossed county lines with the intent to defraud you of the land. We are looking at conspiracy." He opened a criminal file right there on his desk. The moment the subpoena for the AirTag data hit Paige's lawyer, the panic set in. We could see it happening in real time on the server logs. Paige began mass deleting text messages. She wiped her call history. She tried to purge the family group chat, but she was too late. Sierra's preservation order had been served to the telecom companies 24 hours earlier. Paige was not deleting evidence. She was only deleting her copy of it. The server still held every word, every plan, every malicious joke. And then, I found the reason for the rush. Among the recovered documents from the cloud drive that Evan had accessed was a PDF that Paige had tried to delete 3 times. It was a document titled Option Agreement, Red Hollow Solar Project. I opened it. It was a contract between the Rivera Family LLC and the solar developer. It guaranteed the sale of my 40 acres for a sum of $1.2 million, nearly 4 times what the initial offer had been. But the kicker was the date. The contract had a deadline. The developers needed the land title clear and transferred by the end of this month, or the deal would void. And at the bottom of the page, underneath the developer's signature, was a signature that made my blood run cold. It was signed Ajwa Paige Wells, manager. She had already sold my land. She had taken a six-figure advance payment. I saw the wire transfer reference number in the margin. She had spent the money, and now she was days away from defaulting on a contract she had no legal right to sign. They did not just want to control me, they needed to legally become me, or Paige was going to prison for fraud against a billion-dollar energy company. I looked at the signature, then at Sierra. They thought I would never come back. I said, feeling the weight of the paper in my hand, but I came back, and I brought the receipts. My family walked into the courtroom wearing the softest shades of pastel I had ever seen. Paige was in a beige cardigan that screamed maternal concern. And my father, Gordon, wore a light gray sweater that suggested a gentle, retired grandfather rather than a man who had engineered a marooning. They looked like a catalog advertisement for a wholesome American family. I, on the other hand, wore a charcoal suit, sharp and severe. I was not there to look like a daughter. I was there to look like a plaintiff. The strategy of the opposing counsel was immediately obvious. They did not want to talk about the boat. They wanted to talk about my mind. Paige took the stand first. She was a natural performer. She did not sob. She let a single, brave tear slide down her cheek as she described my alleged decline. She told the judge that I had been unraveling for months. She used words like manic and paranoid. She claimed that my refusal to join the family LLC was not a financial decision, but a symptom of my inability to trust those who loved me. Then, her lawyer pulled up a projection of a text message thread I had sent to a colleague 6 months ago. In the text, I had written, "I am going to burn this place to the ground if I have to look at one more spreadsheet." It was a common figure of speech, a vent about corporate burnout. But in that courtroom, stripped of context and read aloud by a lawyer with a somber baritone voice, it sounded like an arson threat. This is the mindset of the proposed conservatee, the lawyer argued. Volatility, aggression, a danger to herself and others. I felt Evan tense up beside me. I placed a hand on his arm, pressing down hard. "Do not react," I signaled. "If we get angry, they get their clip." I kept my face entirely neutral, a mask of bored compliance. When it was Sierra Lang's turn, she did not raise her voice. She simply adjusted her glasses and walked to the podium. "Your Honor," Sierra said, "the petitioner claims they are here because they are terrified for Ms. Rivera's safety. They claim that on Sunday, when Ms. Rivera went missing on the lake, they were distraught." Sierra motioned to the screen. "This is the security footage from the marina parking lot at 2:14 p.m. on the day in question." The video played. It showed Paige and Gordon standing by their SUV. They were not pacing. They were not on the phone with the police. They were eating ice cream cones. "Does this look like a family in crisis?" Sierra asked. "Or does it look like a family killing time?" Paige shifted in her seat, the beige cardigan suddenly looking a lot less comfortable. Then came the technical assault. Miles Cade took the stand. He was concise and brutal. He explained the mechanics of the battery disconnect. He explained that a negative cable does not unscrew itself and tuck itself behind a casing. He testified that the ignition key was not just missing, but that the spare key, the one usually kept in the glove box, was also gone. "In your professional opinion, Investigator Cade," Sierra asked, "was this vessel disabled by accident?" "No," Cade said. "It was disabled by design." Next was Duke Rayner. The mechanic looked uncomfortable in his Sunday best, but his voice was steady. He pointed a calloused finger at Gordon. "I saw that man," Duke said. "He was laughing. He bought a keychain that said Lake Life. If my daughter was out on the water with no radio and a storm coming, I would not be buying souvenirs. I would be screaming for a boat." The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, narrowed her eyes at my father. Gordon tried to maintain his concerned dad face, but I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. The room grew heavy when my mother, Elaine, was called. Her testimony had been taken in a closed session earlier that morning. Away from Gordon and Page's influence, the judge held the transcript in her hands. "I have reviewed Mrs. Rivera's deposition," Justice Halloway said, looking over her reading glasses. "She indicates that there was a discussion about teaching Isla a lesson. She indicates that the removal of the boat's safety equipment was discussed beforehand as a way to induce fear." Page let out a gasp. "That is not true. Mom is confused." "Silence," the judge snapped. "One more outburst, Ms. Wells, and I will have you removed." The final nail in the coffin was the court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Aris. He had spent 3 hours with me the previous day. "Ms. Rivera shows signs of acute stress," Dr. Aris testified. "However, her stress is entirely situational. She is articulate, logical, and oriented. Her paranoia is not a delusion. It is a rational response to a documented threat. In my professional opinion, she is fully competent to manage her own affairs. In fact, she seems to be the only one in this room managing them effectively." Sierra stood up. "Your Honor, this petition is not about mental health. It is about money, specifically the value of 40 acres in Red Hollow County." She laid out the timeline, the offer, the refusal, the sudden need for a conservatorship, the fraudulent solar contract signed by Page. "They needed control of her signature by the end of the month," Sierra said, "because they have already spent the advance." Justice Halloway looked at the defense table. "Mr. Rivera, Ms. Wells, is it true that you have entered into a contract to sell land that you do not own?" "We were acting in the best interest of the estate," Page blurted out. Standing up, "The deal expires on Friday. If she does not sign, we lose the multiplier. The developer will walk." The courtroom went dead silent. Page froze. She realized what she had just done. She had not argued that I was crazy. She had argued that I was inconveniently slow. She had admitted that the deadline was the driver, not my mental state. She had just confessed to the motive. Justice Halloway closed the file with a sharp thud. "Petition for temporary conservatorship is denied with prejudice," the judge ruled, her voice icy. "Furthermore, based on the testimony regarding the events at the lake, I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order against Gordon Rivera and Paige Wells. You are to have no contact with Isla Rivera or Evan Hale. You are not to come within 500 feet of their residence or place of employment." The judge leaned forward. "And I am referring the transcripts of this hearing, specifically the testimony regarding the boat tampering and the unauthorized land contract, to the district attorney's office. This court handles family law. But what I have heard today sounds a lot like criminal fraud." Page collapsed back into her chair, her face draining of color. Gordon looked at the floor. They had walked in expecting to leave with power of attorney. Instead, they were leaving with a restraining order and a looming criminal investigation. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I simply packed my files into my briefcase, snapped the lock shut, and walked out. As I passed Paige, she looked up at me, her eyes wet with panic and rage. "You ruined us," she hissed. "We did this for the family." I stopped. I looked down at her, at the beige cardigan, at the trembling hands that had disconnected my battery cable. "No," I said, my voice low and steady. "You did this to the family. I just audited the results." Desperation is a powerful hallucinogen. It makes smart people stupid and cautious people reckless. My family had just lost in family court, but they were not defeated. They were terrified. They had a deadline hanging over their heads like a guillotine, the solar farm contract that Page had fraudulently signed. They needed my signature to ratify the sale before the developer realized they had sold land they did not own. They needed a miracle. So, I gave them one. I sent a single text message to Paige at 7 o'clock on Wednesday morning. "I am tired of fighting. If we can settle this quietly, I will consider signing the transfer deed. Meet me at the notary office on 4th Street at noon. Bring the papers." It was the bait they were desperate to swallow. They ignored the restraining order because greed is louder than a judge's gavel. They assumed that the court victory was just my way of increasing my leverage, a negotiating tactic to get a bigger cut of the money. They did not understand that I did not want the money. I wanted the truth recorded on a device that was admissible in a criminal trial. We set the stage at the office of a neutral notary, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had been briefed by Sierra Lang. The conference room was standard, beige walls, a long mahogany table, and a view of the parking lot, but the room was not empty. Behind the one-way glass of the adjoining viewing room, Investigator Miles Cade and a stenographer from the district attorney's office were waiting. On the table, sitting innocuously between a pitcher of water and a stack of legal pads, was a high-fidelity omnidirectional microphone, disguised as a conference speakerphone. When Page and Gordon walked in, they looked like they had won the lottery. The tension from the hearing was gone, replaced by a smug, frantic energy. Page was carrying a leather portfolio. Gordon was smiling that paternal, forgiving smile that used to make me feel safe, but now made my skin crawl. "I knew you would come to your senses, Isla," Gordon said, pulling out a chair. "We are family. We fight, but we fix things. That is what we do." "Just sign here," Page said, sliding a thick document across the table. She did not even sit down. She was vibrating with urgency. "This ratifies the transfer to the LLC and authorizes the sale. Once you sign, the developer releases the rest of the funds, and we can all move on. We can put this ugly week behind us." I looked at the document. It was a standard warranty deed, but attached to the back was a ratification of all prior acts by the manager. If I signed this, I was retroactively making her fraud legal. I picked up a pen. I held it over the paper. I watched their eyes. They were laser-focused on the tip of that pen. They were holding their breath. "I will sign," I said softly. "But I need to understand one thing first." "Anything," Gordon said, waving his hand magnanimously. "Ask anything." I put the pen down. "Why did you leave us in the middle of the lake?" The room went quiet. Sierra, sitting next to me, shifted slightly, but kept her face blank. "Isla, honey, let's not rehash that," Gordon said, his smile faltering. "It was a misunderstanding, a mix-up with the rental company." "No," I said, my voice rising just enough to sound emotional, to sound like I needed closure before I could capitulate. "I need to know, was it because you hated me? Or was it just business? If I am going to sign away my grandmother's legacy, I need to know why my sister tried to hurt me." Paige snapped. She was tired. She was stressed, and she was so close to the money she could taste it. Her arrogance, which had been bruised in court, came rushing back. "It wasn't about hurting you, Isla," Paige said, her voice sharp and condescending. "It was about reality. You were being impossible. You were holding up a deal that changes everything for this family because of some sentimental attachment to dirt." "So you stranded us?" I asked. "We needed you to wake up," Paige said, leaning over the table. "You have always been so stubborn. We needed you. Scared. We needed you to realize that you can't handle things on your own. If you had just called us like a normal person, we would have come and got you in an hour. It was a wake-up call, not a murder plot." "A wake-up call," I repeated. "With no water and a disconnected battery?" "No one got hurt. Isla," Gordon interrupted, his tone shifting from fatherly to annoyed. "It was just a few hours. You are being dramatic. It was a hot afternoon. That is all. We were going to come back before sunset anyway. Now pick up the pen." I looked at the speakerphone. I knew the tape was rolling. I knew Miles Cade was hearing every word. It was just a few hours. We needed you scared. They had just admitted to intent, time frame, and motive. They had confessed to unlawful restraint and reckless endangerment in a room they thought was safe. "I can't sign this," I said, pushing the paper away. The air left the room. Paige's face went from smug to furious in a nanosecond. "What do you mean, you can't sign?" she hissed. "We have a deal." "I can't sign it," I said, because I am not the manager of the Rivera Family LLC, you are… Right, Paige? Yes, obviously, she spat. Then why? I asked, looking toward the door where Evan was standing. Does the contract you sent to the developer already have my signature on it? Evan walked in. He was not holding a weapon, he was holding a file. He placed a single piece of paper on the table. It was the option agreement we had recovered from the cloud. On the signature line for Isla Rivera, member, was a scrawled signature in blue ink. That is dated 2 weeks ago, Sierra said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Isla did not sign that. You forged her signature to secure the advance payment from the energy company. That is wire fraud. That is forgery. That is grand larceny. Paige went pale. She looked at the document, then at me. She tried to grab the paper, but Evan put his hand over it. And just so we are clear on the timeline, Evan said, pulling out his phone. Here is the data log from the AirTag on the spare key. You claimed you lost the key or threw it overboard, but this map shows the key traveled from the marina to the highway and parked at your house at 4:15 in the afternoon. You kept the key. Paige, you didn't just strand us. You stole the means of escape and took it home as a souvenir. Gordon looked at the map, then at his daughter. You kept the key? He whispered. You told me you tossed it in the deep channel. I meant to. Paige stammered, backing away from the table. I just put it in my pocket and forgot. It doesn't matter, I said. You kept the key. You forged the signature. And you just admitted on tape that the lake incident was a planned event to coerce me into signing papers. Tape? Paige whispered. She looked at the speakerphone. The door to the viewing room opened. Miles Cade walked out, followed by 2 uniformed officers. He was not smiling. Gordon Rivera, Paige Wells, Cade said, holding up his badge. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful restraint, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it, although you have already said plenty. The room erupted into chaos. Paige started screaming that it was a setup, that I had tricked them. Gordon turned on her instantly. She told me it was legal, Gordon shouted at the officers as they cuffed his hands behind his back. She told me she had power of attorney. I didn't know about the forgery. That was her. You liar, Paige shrieked, struggling against the officer. It was your idea to scare her. You said we had to break her. I sat at the table, watching them turn on each other. The united front of the perfect family crumbled the moment the handcuffs clicked. They were not protecting the legacy anymore. They were bargaining for lighter sentences. Sierra reached over and stopped the recording. She picked up the unsigned deed and dropped it into the shredder bin in the corner. Well, Sierra said, watching my father being led out the door, still shouting about his innocence, I think that counts as a successful settlement meeting. I looked at the empty chairs where my family had sat. I looked at the pen I had refused to use. They wanted me to sign, I said quietly. I just signed their indictments instead. The criminal trial did not feel like a battle. It felt like an autopsy. Unlike the chaotic emotional theater of family court, the criminal proceedings were cold, precise, and devastatingly logical. Prosecutor Jordan Pike did not care about family dynamics or childhood grudges. He cared about the timeline, and he constructed one that was airtight, day by day. The jury watched my family's narrative disintegrate under the weight of hard data. The security footage from the marina played on a loop, showing Gordon and Paige eating ice cream while Evan and I were drifting. The forensic report on the printer matched the threatening note to Paige's home office. The AirTag data proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Paige had possessed the stolen key the entire time. But it was the financial trail that sealed Paige's fate. The prosecution demonstrated that she was not just an overzealous sister, she was a desperate debtor. She had already spent 60% of the advance money from the solar developer on personal debts and a down payment on a luxury vehicle. She was not trying to save the family estate. She was trying to save herself from bankruptcy. The solar contract was her lifeline, and I was the anchor dragging her down. My father, Gordon, tried to distance himself. His defense attorney argued that he was an elderly man manipulated by a greedy daughter. It might have worked, except for an email Pike dug up from the archives. It was sent from Gordon to Paige 2 days before the trip. The email read, "If she does not sign, she loses everything. We make sure she understands that she has no safety net without us." It was a single sentence, but it proved intent. He was not a bystander. He was the architect of the pressure campaign. He knew the plan was to strip me of my resources and my confidence until I broke. My mother, Elaine, avoided prison. She took a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. She testified about the conversations in the kitchen, the rehearsals of the lies they planned to tell the police, and the specific instructions Paige gave her to text me incessantly to create a record of false concern. Her testimony was damning, but watching her give it was the hardest part of the trial. She looked small and defeated, a woman who had chosen the path of least resistance for 30 years until it led her off a cliff. The judge sentenced her to probation, but the real punishment was the 5-year no-contact order. She had saved her freedom, but she had lost her daughter forever. Then came the final twist, the one that made the jury gasp. During the discovery phase, investigators found a document on Paige's laptop created the night before the trip. It was titled Incident Response Strategy. It was a script. It outlined exactly what they would say to the police if Evan or I were injured or killed out on the water. The script did not blame the boat rental company. It blamed Evan. Paige had prepared a narrative claiming that Evan was reckless, that he had insisted on taking the boat out despite warnings, and that he had been drinking. They were ready to frame my fiancé for negligent homicide to cover their own tracks. They were prepared to send him to prison for manslaughter just to keep their hands clean. When that document was read aloud, Evan squeezed my hand so hard his knuckles turned white. They were not just going to break me, they were going to destroy him as collateral damage. The sentencing hearing was brief. Paige Wells was found guilty of grand larceny, forgery, and reckless endangerment. She was sentenced to 4 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the solar developer and to me for legal fees. As the bailiff handcuffed her, she did not look at me with anger. She looked at me with shock. She still could not believe that the systems she thought would protect her, her status, her appearance, her family name, had failed. Gordon Rivera received a suspended sentence of 3 years and strict probation due to his age and health. But the judge imposed a 10-year protective order. He was barred from owning firearms, leaving the state, or contacting me in any way. He walked out of the courtroom a free man, but he looked like a ghost. His reputation in Cedar Ridge was incinerated. I did not stick around to watch them leave. I had work to do. I took the deed to the 40 acres in Red Hollow, the land that had started this war, and I did not sell it. Instead, I placed it into a specialized legal structure called an irrevocable trust. I hired a corporate trustee to manage it, a cold, unfeeling bank that could not be guilt-tripped or manipulated. The trust documents contained a specific clause. No beneficiary related to the grantor by blood could ever hold title or management rights. I locked the land away in a fortress that my family could never breach, ensuring that the solar farm revenue would go to charities supporting victims of financial abuse. Then, I packed my bags. Cedar Ridge was poisoned ground. Every street corner, every restaurant, and every face reminded me of the people who had tried to erase me. Evan and I moved 3 hours north, to a quiet town near the hill country where no one knew the name Rivera. We changed our phone numbers. We changed our emails. We built a new life behind a wall of healthy boundaries. I still work in compliance, but I no longer just look for errors in spreadsheets. I volunteer my time helping people navigate the legal complexities of financial coercion. I teach them that no is a complete sentence and that blood is not a binding contract. 6 months after the trial, Evan and I went for a walk. We found a small, quiet lake near our new home. The water was glass still, reflecting the morning sky for a long time. I thought I would never be able to look at a body of water without feeling the phantom heat of that aluminum boat and the terror of drifting. I thought the trauma would own me. But as I stood there, watching a duck paddle through the reeds, I realized I felt nothing but calm. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was the clarity of the truth. My family thought they could write the story of my life. They thought they could edit me out, rewrite my sanity, and publish a tragedy where they were the heroes. They underestimated the one thing I do best. I keep the records. Evan put his arm around me, and we watched the sun rise over the water. They thought we would never come back, but I came back with receipts. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Isla's victory. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, hit the like button, and if you really want to support us, smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.